The woman sleeping on the cot in the woodshed was Albertine American Horse. The name was left over from her mother's short marriage. The boy was the son of the man she had loved and let go. Buddy was on the cot, too, sitting on the edge because he'd been awake 3 hours, watching out for his mother, and besides, she took up the whole cot. Her feet hung over the edge, limp and brown as 2 trout. Her long arms reached out and slapped at things she saw in her dreams. Buddy had been knocked awake out of hiding in a washing machine while herds of policemen with dogs searched through a large building with many tiny rooms. When the arm came down, Buddy screamed because it had a blue cuff and sharp silver buttons. "Tss," his mother mumbled, half awake. "Wasn't nothing." But Buddy sat up after her breathing went deep again, and he watched. There was something coming, and he knew it. It was coming from very far off, but he had a picture of it in his mind. It was a large thing made of metal and with many barbed hooks, points, and drag chains on it, something like a giant potato peeler that rolled out of the sky, scraping clouds down with it and jabbing or crushing everything that lay in its path on the ground. Buddy watched his mother. If he woke her up, she would know what to do about the thing. But he thought he'd wait until he saw it for sure before he shook her. She was pretty, sleeping, and he liked knowing he could look at her as long and close up as he wanted. He took a strand of her hair and held it in his hands as if it was the rein to a delicate beast. She was strong enough and could pull him along like the horse their name was. Buddy had his mother's and his grandmother's name because his father had been a big mistake. "They're all mistakes, even your father, but you are the best thing that ever happened to me." That was what she said when he asked. Even Katie, the boyfriend crippled from being in a car wreck, was not as a good thing that had happened to his mother as Buddy was. He was a medium-sized mistake, she said. He's hurt, and I shouldn't even say that, but it's the truth. At the moment, Buddy knew that being the best thing in his mother's life, he was also the reason they were hiding from the cops. He wanted to touch the satin roses sewed on her pink t-shirt, but he knew he shouldn't do that even in her sleep. If she woke up and found him touching the roses, she would say, "Quit that, Buddy." Sometimes she told him to stop hugging her like a gorilla. She never said that in the mean voice she used when he oppressed her, but when she said that, he loosened up anyway. There were times he felt like hugging her so hard and in such a special way that she would say to him, "Let's get married." And there were also times he closed his eyes and wished that she would die. Only a few times, but still it haunted him that his wish might come true. He and Uncle Lawrence would be left alone. Buddy wasn't worried, though, about his mother getting married to someone else. She had said to her friend Madonna, "All men suck," when she thought that Buddy wasn't listening. He had made an uncertain sound, and when they heard him, they took him in their arms. "Except for you, Buddy," his mother said. "All except for you. And maybe Uncle Lawrence, although he's pushing it." "The cops suck the worst, though," Buddy whispered into his mother's sleeping face, "because they're after us." He felt tired again, slumped down, and put his legs beneath the blanket. He closed his eyes and got the feeling that the cot was lifting up beneath him, that it was arching its canvas back and then traveling very fast in the wrong direction, for when he looked up, he saw the 3 of them were advancing to meet the great metal thing with hooks and barbs and all sorts of sharp equipment to catch their bodies and draw their blood. He heard its insides as it rushed towards them, purring softly like a powerful motor, and then they were right in its shadow. He pulled the reins as hard as he could, and the beast reared, lifting him. His mother clapped her hand across his mouth. "Okay," she said, "lay low. They're outside and they're gonna hunt." She touched his shoulder, and Buddy leaned over with her to look through a crack in the boards. They were out there all right. Albertine saw them. 2 officers and that social worker woman, Vicky Koob. There had been no whistle, no dream, no voice to warn her that they were coming. There was only the crunching sound of cinders in the yard, the engine purring, the dust sifting off their car in a fine light brownish cloud and settling around them. The three people came to a halt in their husk of metal, the car emblazoned with the North Dakota State Highway Patrol emblem, which is the glowing profile of the Sioux policeman, Red Tomahawk, the one who killed Sitting Bull. Albertine gave Buddy the blanket and told him that he might have to wrap it around him and hide underneath the cot. "We're going to wait and see what they do." She took him in her lap and hunched her arms around him. "Don't you worry," she whispered against his ear. "Lawrence knows how to fool them." Buddy didn't want to look at the car and the people. He felt his mother's heart beating beneath his ear so fast it seemed to push the satin roses in and out. He put his face to them carefully and breathed the deep, soft, powdery woman smell of her. That smell was also in her little face cream bottles, in her brushes, and around the wash bowl after she used it. The satin felt so unbearably smooth against his cheek that he had to press closer. She didn't push him away, like he expected, but hugged him still tighter, until he felt close as he had ever been to back inside her again, where she said he came from. Within the smells of her things, her soft skin, and the satin of her roses, he closed his eyes then, and took his breath softly and quickly with her heart. They were out there, but they didn't dare get out of the car yet because of Lawrence's big, ragged dogs. 3 of these dogs had loped up the dirt driveway with the car. They were rangy, alert, and bounced up and down on their cushioned paws like wolves. They didn't waste their energy barking, but positioned themselves quietly, one at either car door, and the third in front of the bellied-out screen door to Uncle Lawrence's house. It was 6 in the morning, but the wind was already up, blowing dust, ruffling their short, moth-eaten coats. The big brown one on Vicky Coob's side had an unusual black and white markings, stripes almost, like a hyena, and he grinned at her, tongue out and teeth showing. "Shoo!" Miss Coob opened her door with a quick jerk. The brown dog sidestepped the door and jumped before her, tiptoeing. Its dirty white muzzle curled and its eyes crossed suddenly, as if it was zeroing its crosshair sights in on the exact place it would bite her. She ducked back and slammed the door. "It's mean," she told Officer Brackett. He was printing out some type of form. The other officer, Harmony, a slow man, had not yet reacted to the car's halt. He had been sitting quietly in the back seat, but now he rolled down his window and, with no change in expression, unsnapped his holster and drew his pistol out and pointed it at the dog on his side. The dog smacked down on its belly, wiggled under the car, and was out and around the back of the house before Harmony drew his gun back. The other dogs vanished with him. From wherever they had disappeared to, they began to yap and howl, and the door to the low shoebox-style house fell open. "Hey, what's going on?" Uncle Lawrence put his head out the door and opened wide the one eye he had in working order. The eye bulged impossibly wider in outrage when he saw the police car. But the eyes of the 2 officers and Miss Vicky Coob were wide open too, because they had never seen Uncle Lawrence in his sleeping get-up or, indeed, witnessed anything like it. For his ribs, which were cracked from a bad fall and still mending, Uncle Lawrence wore a thick corset laced up the front with a striped sneakers lace. His glass eye and his set of dentures were still out for the night, so his face puckered here and there around its absences and scars, like a damaged but fierce little cake. Although he had a few gray streaks now, Uncle Lawrence's hair was still thick, and because he wore a special contraption of elastic straps around his head every night, 2 oiled waves always crested on either side of his middle part. All of this would have been sufficient to astonish, even without the most striking part of his outfit, the smoking jacket. It was made of black satin and hung open around his corset, dragging a tasseled belt. Gold thread dragons struggled up the lapel and blasted their furry red breath around his neck. As Lawrence walked down the steps, he put his arms up in surrender, and the gold tassels in the inner seams of his sleeves dropped into view. "My heavens, what a sight!" Vicky Coob was impressed. "A character," apologized Officer Harmony. As a tribal police officer who could be counted on to help out the state patrol, Harmony thought he always had to explain about Indians or get twice as tough to show he did not favor them. He was slow-moving and shy, but 2 jumps ahead of the other people all the same, and now, as he watched Uncle Lawrence's splendid approach, he gazed speculatively at the torn and bulging pocket of the smoking jacket. Harmony had been inside Uncle Lawrence's house before, and knew that above his draped orange crate shelf of war medals, a blue-black German Luger was hung carefully in a net of flat-headed nails and fishing line. Thinking of this deadly exhibition, he got out of the car and shambled towards Lawrence with a dreamy little smile of welcome on his face. But when he searched Lawrence, he found that the bulging pocket held only the lonesome-looking dentures from Lawrence's empty jaw. They were still dripping with denture polish. "I had been cleaning them when you arrived," Uncle Lawrence explained with acid dignity. He took out the toothbrush from the other pocket and aimed it like a rifle. "Quit that, you old idiot!" Harmony tossed the toothbrush away. "For once, you ain't done nothin'. We came for your nephew." Lawrence looked at Harmony with a faint air of puzzlement. "Ma frère, listen," threatened Harmony amiably. "Those 2 white people in the car came here to get him for the welfare. They got papers on your nephew that give them the right to take him." "Papers?" Uncle Lawrence puffed out his deeply pitted cheeks. "Let me see them papers." The 2 of them walked over to Vicky's side of the car, and she pulled a copy of the court order from her purse. Lawrence put his teeth back in and adjusted them with busy workings of his jaw. "Just a minute." He reached into his breast pocket as he bent close to Miss Vicky Coob. "I can't read these. I have in my eye." He took the eye from his breast pocket delicately, and as he popped it into his face, the social worker's mouth fell open in a consternated "Oh." "What is this?" she cried in a little voice. Uncle Lawrence looked at her mildly. The white glass of the eye was cold as lard. The black iris was strangely charged and menacing. "He's nuts," Brackett huffed along the side of Vicky's neck. "Never mind him." Vicky's hair had sweated down her nape in tiny corkscrews, and some of the hairs were so long and dangly now that they disappeared into the zippered back of her dress. Brackett noticed this as he spoke into her ear. His face grew red, and the backs of his hands prickled. He slid under the steering wheel and got out of the car. He walked around the hood to stand with Leo Harmony. "We could take you in, too," said Brackett roughly. Lawrence eyed the officers in what was taken as defiance. "If you don't cooperate, we'll get out the handcuffs," they warned. One of Lawrence's arms was stiff and would not move until he rubbed it with witch hazel in the morning. His other arm worked fine, though, and he stuck it out in front of Brackett. "Get them handcuffs," he urged them. "Put me in a welfare home." Brackett snapped one side of the handcuffs on Lawrence's good arm and the other to the handle of the police car. "That's to hold you," he said. "We're wasting our time. Harmony, you search that little shed over there by the tall grass, and Miss Coob and myself will search the house." "My rights is violated!" Lawrence shrieked suddenly. They ignored him. He tugged at the handcuff and thought of the good heavy file he kept in his toolbox and the German Luger oiled and ready, but never loaded, because of Buddy, over his shelf. He should have used it on these bad ones, even Harmony in his big-time white man job. He wouldn't last long in that job anyway, before somebody gave him what for. "It's a damn scheme," said Uncle Lawrence, rattling his chains against the car. He looked over at the shed and thought maybe Albertine and Buddy had sneaked away before the car pulled into the yard. But he sagged, seeing Albertine move like a shadow within the boards. "Oh, it's all a damn scheme," he muttered again. "I want to find that boy and salvage him," Vicky Coob explained to Officer Brackett as they walked into the house. "Look at his family life. The old man's crazy as a bedbug, the mother intoxicated somewhere." Brackett nodded, energetic, eager. He was a short, hopeful redhead who failed consistently to win the hearts of women. Vicky Coob intrigued him. Now as he watched, she pulled a tiny pen out of an ornamental clip on her blouse. It was attached to a retractable line that would suck the pen back, like a child eating one strand of spaghetti. Something about the pen on its line excited Brackett to the point of discomfort. His hand shook as he opened the screen door and stepped in, beckoning Miss Koob to follow. They could see the house was empty at first. It was only one rectangular room with whitewashed walls and a little gas stove in the middle. They had already come through the cooking lean-to with the other stove and washstand and rusty old refrigerator. That refrigerator had nothing in it but some wrinkled potatoes and a package of turkey necks. Vicky Koob noted that in her perfect bound notebook. The beds along the wall of the big room were covered with quilts that Albertine's mother, Sophie, had made from bits of old wool coats and pants that the sisters sold in bundles at the mission. There was no one hiding beneath the beds. No one was under the little aluminum dinette table covered with green oilcloth, or the soft brown wood chairs tucked up to it. One wall of the big room was filled with neatly stacked crates of things, old tools and springs, and small half-dismantled appliances. 5 or 6 television sets were stacked against the wall. Their control panels spewed colored wires, and at least one was cracked all the way across. Only the topmost set, with the coat hanger antenna angled sensitively to catch the bounding signals around Little Shell, looked like it could possibly work. Not one thing escaped Vicky Koob's trained and cataloging gaze. She made note of the cupboard that held only commodity flour and coffee, the unsanitary tin oil drum beneath the kitchen window, full of empty surplus pork cans and beer bottles, caught her eye, as did Uncle Lawrence's physical and mental deteriorations. She quickly described these benchmarks of alcoholic dependency within the extended family of Woodrow, Buddy, American Horse, as she walked around the room with the little notebook open, pushed against her belly to steady it. Although Vicky had been here before, Albertine's presence had always made it difficult for her to take notes. Twice the maximum allowable space between door and threshold, she wrote now. Probably no insulation, 2 to 3 inch cracks in walls inadequately sealed with whitewash mud. She made a mental note, but could see no point in describing Lawrence's stuffed reclining chair that only reclined, the shadeless lamp with its plastic orchid in the bubble glass base, or the 3-dimensional picture of Jesus that Lawrence had once demonstrated to her. When plugged in, lights rolled behind the water the Lord stood on, so that he seemed to be strolling, although he never actually went forward, of course, but only pushed the glowing waves behind him forever like a poor tame rat in a treadmill. Brackett cleared his throat with a nervous rasp and touched Vicky's shoulder. "What are you writing?" She moved away and continued to scribble as if thoroughly absorbed in her work. "Officer Brackett displays an undue amount of interest in my person," she wrote. Perhaps? He snatched playfully at the book, but she hugged it to her chest and moved off smiling. More curls had fallen, wetted to the base of her neck. Looking out the window, she sighed long and loud. All night on brush rollers for this. What a joke. Brackett shoved his hands in his pockets, his mouth opened slightly, then shut with a small throttled cluck. When Albertine saw Harmony ambling across the yard with his big brown thumbs in his belt, his placid smile, and his tiny black eyes moving back and forth, she put Buddy under the cot. Harmony stopped at the shed and stood quietly. He spread his arms wide to show her he hadn't drawn his big police gun. "My cousin," he said in the mischief dialect that people used if they were relatives or sometimes if they needed gas or a couple of dollars. "Why don't you come out here and stop this foolishness?" "I ain't your cousin," Albertine said. Anger boiled up in her suddenly. "I ain't related to no pigs." She bit her lip and watched him through the cracks, circling, a big tan punching dummy with his boots full of sand so he never stayed down once he fell. He was empty inside, all stale air. But he knew how to get to her, so much better than a white cop could. And now he was circling because he wasn't sure she didn't have a weapon, maybe a knife, or the German Luger that was the only thing that her father, Albert American-Horse, had left his wife and daughter besides his name. Harmony knew that Albertine was a tall, strong woman who took two big men to subdue when she didn't want to go into the drunk tank. She had hard hips, broad shoulders, and stood tall like her Sioux father, the American horse who was killed threshing in Belle Prairie. "I feel bad to have to do this," Harmony said to Albertine, "but for goodness sakes, let's nobody get hurt. Come on out with the boy, why don't you? I know you got him in there." Albertine did not give herself away this time. She let him wonder. Slowly and quietly, she pulled her belt through its loops and wrapped it around and around her hand until only the big oval buckle with turquoise chunks shaped into a butterfly stuck out over her knuckles. Harmony was talking, but she wasn't listening to what he said. She was listening to the pitch of his voice, the tone of it that would tighten or tremble at a certain moment when he decided to rush the shed. He kept talking slowly and reasonably, flexing the dialect from time to time, even mentioning her father. "He was a damn good man. I don't care what they say, Albertine. I knew him." Albertine looked at the stone butterfly that spread its wings across her fist. The wings looked light and cool, not heavy. It almost looked like it was ready to fly. Harmony wanted to get to Albertine through her father, but she would not think about American-Horse. She concentrated on the blue sky stone. Yet the shape of the stone, the color, betrayed her. She saw her father suddenly bending at the grill of their old gray car. She was small then. The memory came from so long ago it seemed like a dream, narrowly focused, snapshot clear. He was bending by the grill in the sun. It was hot summer. Wings of heat, dark blue, spread across the back of his work shirt. He always wore soft blue shirts, the color of shade cloudier than this stone. His stiff hair had grown out of its short haircut and flopped over his forehead. When he stood up and turned away from the car, Albertine saw that he had a butterfly. "It's dead," he told her, broke its wings, and died on the grill. She must have been 5, maybe 6, wearing one of the boys' T-shirts Mama bleached in Hylex water. American-Horse took the butterfly, a black and yellow one, and rubbed it on Albertine's collarbone and chest and arms until the color and the powder of it were blended into her skin. "For Grace," he said. And Albertine had felt a strange lightening in her arms, in her chest, when he did this and said, "For Grace." The way he said it, Grace meant everything the butterfly was. The sharp, delicate wings, the way it floated over the grass, the way its wings seemed to breathe fanning in the sun, the wisdom of the way it blended into the flowers or changed into a leaf. In herself she felt the same kind of possibilities and closed her eyes, almost in shock or pain. She felt so light and powerful at that moment. Then her father had caught her and thrown her high into the air. She could not remember landing in his arms, or landing at all. She only remembered the sun filling her eyes and the world tipping crazily behind her, out of sight. "He was a damn good man," Harmony said again. Albertine heard his starch uniform gathering before his boots hit the ground. Once, twice, 3 times. It took him 4 solid jumps to get right where she wanted him. She kicked the plank door open when he reached for the handle, and the corner caught him on the jaw. He faltered, and Albertine hit him flat on the chin with the butterfly. She hit him so hard the shock of it went up her arm like a string pulled taut. Her fist opened, numb, and she let the belt unloop before she closed her hand on the tip of it and sent the stone butterfly swooping out in a wide circle around her as if it was on the end of a leash. Harmony reeled backward as she walked toward him swinging the belt. She expected him to fall, but he just stumbled, and then he took the gun from his hip. Albertine let the belt go limp. She and Harmony stood within feet of each other, breathing. Each heard the human sound of air going in and out of the other person's lungs. Each read the face of the others, as if deciphering letters carved into a softly eroding veins of stone. Albertine saw the pattern of tiny arteries that age, drink, and hard living had blown to the surface of the man's face. She saw the spoked wheels of his irises and the arteries' tangled threads that sewed him up. She saw the living net of springs and tissues that held him together and trapped him. She saw the random, intimate plan of his person. She took a quick, shallow breath, and her face went strange and tight. She saw the black veins in the wings of the butterfly, roads burnt into a map, and then she was located somewhere in the net of veins and sinew that was the tragic complexity of the world. So she did not see the officer Brackett and Vicky Koob rushing toward her, but felt them instead like flies caught in the same web, rocking it. "Albertine!" Vicky Koob had stopped in the grass. Her voice was shrill and tight. "It's better this way, Albertine. We're going to help you." Albertine straightened, threw her shoulders back. Her father's hand was on her chest and shoulders, lightening her wonderfully. Then, on wings of her father's hands, on dead butterfly wings, Albertine lifted into the air and flew towards the others. The light, powerful feeling swept her up the way she had floated higher, seeing the grass below. It was her father throwing her up into the air and out of danger. Her arms opened for bullets, but no bullets came. Harmony did not shoot. Instead, he raised his fist and brought it down hard on her head. Albertine did not fall immediately, but stood in his arms a moment. Perhaps she gazed still farther back behind the covering of his face. Perhaps she was completely stunned and did not think as she sagged and fell. Her face rolled forward, and hair covered her features, so it was impossible for Harmony to see with just what particular expression she gazed into the head-splitting wheel of light, or blackness, that overcame her. Harmony turned the vehicle onto the gravel road that led back to town. He had convinced the other two that Albertine was more trouble than she was worth, and so they left her behind, and Lawrence too. He stood swearing in the cinder driveway as the car rolled out of sight. Buddy sat between the social worker and Officer Brackett. Vicky tried to hold Buddy fast to keep her arm around at the same time, but the words she screamed at Albertine had broken the seal of antiperspirant beneath her arms. She was sweating now as though she'd stored an ocean up inside of her. Sweat rolled down her back in a shallow river and pooled at her waist and between her breasts. A thin sheen of water came out on her forearms, her face. Vicky gave an irritated moan, but Brackett seemed not to take notice, or take offense at least. Air-conditioned breezes were sweeping over the seat anyway, and very soon they would be comfortable. She smiled at Brackett over Buddy's head. The man grinned back. Buddy stirred. Vicky remembered the emergency chocolate bar she kept in her purse, fished it out, and offered it to Buddy. He didn't react, so she closed his fingers over the package and peeled the paper off one end. The car accelerated. Buddy felt the road and wheels pummeling each other and the rush of the heavy motor purring in high gear. Buddy knew that what he had seen in his mind that morning, the thing coming out of the sky with barbs and chains, had hooked him. Somehow he was caught and held in the sour tin smell of the pale woman's armpit. Somehow he was pinned between their pounds of breathless flesh. He looked at the chocolate in his hand. He was squeezing the bar so hard that a thin brown trickle had melted down his arm. Automatically, he put the bar in his mouth. As he bit down, he saw his mother very clearly, just as she had been when she carried him from the shed. She was stretched flat on the ground, on her stomach, and her arms were curled around her head as if in sleep. One leg was drawn up, and it looked for all the world like she was running full tilt into the ground, as though she had been trying to pass into the earth, to bury herself, but at the last moment something had stopped her. There was no blood on Albertine, but Buddy tasted blood now at the sight of her, for he bit down hard and cut his own lip. He ate the chocolate, every bit of it, tasting his mother's blood. And when he had had the chocolate down inside him and all licked off his hands, he opened his mouth to say thank you to the woman, as his mother had taught him. But instead of a thank you coming out, he was astonished to hear a great rattling scream, and another rip out of him like pieces of his own body, and whirl on to the sharp things all around him.